I'd like to welcome all of you to the 28th Annual Bluff City Cemetery Walk. The Elgin Area Historical Society is very grateful that you've come, your presence. Thank you for supporting us. We hope we have a nice day, a nice walk in store for you. We'll start with Annetta Jens.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to be here today. I was asked to share my family's story with you, a story of my family and our family business. I think it's an interesting story. I hope you do too. It's not a story of great fame or fortune, but it is a story of family, faith, and hard work. I was born here in Elgin on October 22nd, 1910, to Annetta and Bert Pease. My father was a professional photographer in town. We lived at 411 Raymond Street. I so enjoyed my high school years at Elgin High School. I was on the yearbook staff, I sang in the chorus, and actually had a good enough voice to sing solos, and I was in the biology club. I graduated from Elgin High in 1930. In 1936, I married Albert. Now, when I first married Albert, he was working for his father, Otto, at their family business, Jens Potato Chip Company. Otto started the company in 1926 in the basement of their home at 303 Spring Street. After marrying Albert, I worked for the company also, and the company actually began to grow quite a bit. Our business extended into northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin, so that basement wasn't big enough anymore to give us enough product to sell. So Otto built a factory on the corner of Larkin Avenue and Aldine Street. And that's where we operated the business. In 1941, on May 17th, Albert and I were blessed with the birth of our beautiful daughter, Mary Ellen. She was our only child. She was actually somewhat of a celebrity, though, because she was one of the first 2 cesarean births at Sherman Hospital. So I wasn't the celebrity, but she was the celebrity. In 1950, Otto died, and much to our shock and surprise, Albert's mother, Maddie, decided to liquidate the company. Now, this is when our faith really was important to us, one of the many times, because Albert had expected that he would continue to work in the company for his family, but this was not to be. We asked God for guidance as to what to do next and asked him for patience so that we could find what path our life was going to take. Well, Albert needed work, so he worked as a sales representative for a Mormon feed company, and then later took a job at Judson College, and he was in charge of plant operations there. I also went to work. I worked at JCPenney, and I worked at Sherman Hospital in the coffee shop. Albert never did give up his dream of returning to the family business. In 1973, he started up Jens Popcorn Company. Now, that's probably what you read in your program. We started out, well, first of all, we bought our popcorn from a Chicago firm that got its corn from a farm in southern Indiana. It was very tasty corn, very tender, excellent popcorn. We started selling at the flea market in Mukwonago, Wisconsin, and we would haul more than 2 tons of popcorn and popcorn oil to the flea market, and by the weekend, the popcorn was all sold. That's how good the popcorn was. In addition to popcorn, we also made Genzettes and corn nuggets. Now, Genzettes, have you ever heard of them? Okay, Genzettes were Albert's version of Crispet, and a Crispet was a rice cake made of popcorn, not rice, but it looked like a rice cake, made of popcorn with molasses and honey and spices. Well, Albert's version, his Genzette version, also contained some secret ingredients. which made it even tastier. That was a very popular product for us. When Albert died in 1984, I made a major decision to continue the family business. And of course, I couldn't do this without the help of my daughter, Mary Ellen, and her husband, Barry Birchfield. Mary Ellen became the bookkeeper, and Barry was the sales manager for the company, and even their two boys, Donnie and David, helped by packaging and delivering our products. Every morning I would wake up at 6 a.m. and deliver our products, which included raw and cooked popcorn, popcorn salt, popcorn oil, and even poppers and popcorn warmers. Now, at that point in time, I was living at 952 Larkin Avenue, and every 2 weeks, 150-pound bags of popcorn would be delivered to our coach house there. That's where I lived. We took the coach house and made it into our packaging plant. Believe you me, I hauled my share of 50-pound bags here and there and everywhere. I did not need any kind of fitness health club to keep me in good shape. In addition to keeping the company going, I also remained active in our church, the First Baptist Church of Elgin. I was a member there for 65 years, which I'm not sure how many people can say that anymore. I also sang in the choir for 58 years and was a member of some of the organizations such as Gideon International, the organization that provides Bibles in hotels and other places, and was a member of Friends of Judson College. So the church was an important part of our life and of my life too. I continued hauling that popcorn and helping deliver it well into my 70s. I did develop 2 brain tumors, which caused me to be bedridden. And again, thank God for Mary Ellen and Barry. They took care of me. But even when I was in bed with my tumors in those early days, I was able to take phone orders and be a part of the family business, although Mary Ellen and Barry did most of the work. I died at St. Joseph Hospital on August 21st, 1990, just 2 months shy of my 80th birthday. Now, Albert and I are buried here, not here, but we are buried in Bluff City Cemetery. We're buried in section 20, which is east of us, a little way. Here's a picture of our headstone. I just wasn't up to walking there today. I'm sorry. That's why I asked for you to come here. Frankly, the other reason was I love the smell of popcorn, and I wanted to stay close to the popcorn machine. Now, before you go, I have some popcorn advice for you. First of all, the best popcorn in the world is the popcorn you make yourself, right? Because it can't be any fresher than coming, and not the microwave, on top of the stove, right? Well, it even says on our package, we even suggest, keep it sealed and store in the refrigerator. So keep it in an airtight container, something like Tupperware. Keep it in the refrigerator or the freezer until you're ready to pop it. And be sure to follow the directions. You don't want those old maids, and you also don't want burnt popcorn. So follow the directions. Thank you so much for your kind attention, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Well, I have a question for you. How many are here for the first time? Wow, that's terrific. Thanks for coming out. On this green space is where the sexton's house used to stand at one time. Who was the sexton and what were his duties? Well, according to city ordinances, the city council would appoint a city sexton to be in charge of the cemetery, to keep the grounds, the walks, and the avenues free from obstruction and in order. It was his duty to enforce the ordinances of the city concerning the cemetery and report all violations to the mayor or to the city prosecutor in case they needed to prosecute a particular individual who perhaps was out here hunting and fishing and not supposed to be here. He shall have the power to arrest all persons who shall be found discharging firearms, hunting, or trespassing in any manner in the said cemetery, and also to direct how and where any dead body not belonging to the owner of a lot shall be buried, and to prevent the deposit of any body on any avenue, land, or unsold lot. Basically, the sexton was the custodian, bookkeeper, gravedigger, and sheriff of the cemetery. After Bluff City was opened in 1889, the city council agreed to build a house for the sexton to live in with his family. They contracted with W.W. Abel, a local architect, to design the home, which was a Victorian design, and John Wright to build the home for the cost of $3,650. Not a lot today, but it was a lot of money back then. The home was built between the years of 1892 and 1893, and Mr. Markoff and his family moved in shortly thereafter. As I said, it was a Victorian home, and it was built here in this green space, and it faced Bluff City Boulevard at the time. Soon after, and sad to say that as time went on, the city sexton was replaced by a superintendent, and his duties were picked up by city workers. The house, because it was no longer needed for the sexton, became somewhat of a boarding house for park workers. And I said, sad to say, in the 60s, the city gave up the maintenance on the house, and the house was torn down in 1968. The green space remains for the enjoyment of the visitors to the cemetery, and as you see, there are no graves or markers on the green space. One thing I wanted to point out, this is the front of the house that faced the Bluff City Boulevard, the east side of the house, and these light buildings are where the brick buildings are over there today. One of the unique features about the Victorian house is that it had a chapel on the west end of it with a large cemetery. And when the people were finished in the chapel, they had a veranda that they could walk out on and down these curved steps so they could go directly to the lot or area that they wanted to visit in the cemetery. So that's a little bit about the sexton's house. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. If you want to come up and look at the photos, please do so. And I hope you've enjoyed your walk through history today. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon and happy Sunday to each and every one of you. My name is James Talcott Gifford, and I have been gone now for just over 165 years. That fact alone lends credence to my premise that you good folks have a far sharper memory than I do. For you see, ladies and gentlemen, I would find it next to impossible to believe that there exists amongst you even one whose foresight and vision is equal to that which I once had. For you see, my good friends and future neighbors, I knew that our Elgin existed long before I ever saw its gentle rolling bluffs, long before I saw its mighty stream, and long before I walked upon its prairie land of plenty and promise. Long before I left my native New York. No doubt there is a great deal of detail that I could share with you on this day, but time always seems to be of the essence. So what I'm hoping to do today is to whet your appetite with certain facts and stories that will allow you to come back and learn more about the Gifford family and early Elgin days. For example, did you know that not only was I born on the first day of the new year, but I was also born on the first day of the new century? That's correct. I was born on January the 1st, 1800, in an area of New York called Herkimer. Herkimer was a land of great rolling green hills, an ample supply of timber, and yes, it had its own mighty stream. Did you also know that I was the oldest of 11 children, and that 3 of my brothers and sisters and I were key and instrumental in Elgin's earliest hours? Let's see, there was my brother Hezekiah, and my sisters, Harriet and Experience. Yes, that's right. I had a sister by the name of Harriet. Harriet and Experience, who are here, had pale white complexion. They also had snow white full heads of hair from an early age on. Oftentimes they were mistakenly referred to as albinos. Did you know that in 1823 I married Laura Raymond and that we lived in Sherburne, New York, where I was a school teacher and I had a small farm there? We would move within New York State to towns by the name of Holly and Millport and Dundee, the latter of which I helped to establish and name in late 1833, early 1834. Now, my wife Laura was no taller than the average 8th grader, and yet she filled our lives with that of 5 others. Our children's name in order of their birth were Caroline, Lucy, James, Fulton, and baby Sarah. And if time allows, I would love to conclude my speech today with a personal story about baby Sarah. I was a devoutly religious man with strong ties to my Puritan ancestors and was considered to be a Congregationalist. That's where I first heard the word Elgin. You see, it comes from an old Scottish hymn that was written in 1625 and found in our Musica Sacra, which is a book of sacred music. It quickly became my very favorite song, one that I would sing lustily every verse. So enamored I was with this song that I decided early on that if I was to ever come across an unsettled area of my future discovery, that I, regardless of state or territory, would call it Elgin. But it was my brother Hezekiah who was first here. He visited this area scouting for new opportunities for the Gifford family in the summer of 1834. He was so impressed with what he saw here. He took copious notes and returned to New York in the fall of 1834, and he shared those notes with me. We were both excited to return to this area so that I could see with my own eyes. And indeed, in February of 1835, we left New York and headed westward to Illinois. We arrived here on April the 3rd of 1835, and Hezekiah's earlier assessment could not have been more correct. This area had everything we needed and then some. So excited I was that I sat and wrote a letter to my wife Laura, explaining to her where we were and how we were. I would love to be able to read an excerpt of that letter to you, if time permits. And I quote, "Hezekiah and myself have located on the river, have a tolerable supply of timber, some good springs of water, and plenty of good prairie. We have also some fine land of the kind called bur oak openings, the soil of which I think much of. We have selected land lying in considerable swells, such as would be called in this country broken, as I like to see something like hills. The Fox is the finest stream I ever saw. It has uniformly in the state all limestone bottom, its current uniform and gentle, its waters pure, and is abundantly supplied with fine fish. We have selected sites to build upon an elevation of from 30 to 40 feet above the river and from 30 to 40 rods from it, a grove lying in between." End of quote. My original plat of Elgin extended from Division Street to the north, down to Prairie Street on the south, to the east, Chapel Street, and to the west, the Fox River. We built our cabin near to the intersection of Villa and Prairie Street, and that cabin became Elgin's first house of prayer and worship, its first school where my sister Harriet taught, and its first post office where I was appointed later on Elgin's first postmaster and its first justice of the peace. I also operated a sawmill, a tannery, and a brickyard. Much was accomplished in my 50½ years, which leads me to the date of August the 9th, 1850. On this day I contracted Asiatic cholera and passed away the following day on the 10th of August. As irony would have it, I was laid to my eternal rest at the very cemetery that I had just laid out 6 years previous. You know, the one, Channing, by Channing Street. And the newspapers would report in the following days that my funeral was among one of the most expensive in all of history. I guess there are fees associated with the procedures that take place between the time of death and the time of burial. In my case, my family was given the astronomical invoice of $12. Unheard of. Moving ahead to the year of 1930 was the year that this monument, this beautiful Vermont granite behemoth monument, was placed here by fellow Elginites. And I'm not exactly sure why, if its intent was to remind you of who we were and what we brought here, or if it was simply to say thank you to my family for that which we had done. In either way, I hope that you enjoy it as I know I do. And now for that promised story of my youngest daughter, baby Sarah. As you probably guessed by now, I had to return to New York to retrieve my family and all of our worldly possessions and remove them here to Elgin, to their new home. My daughter Sarah was approximately 1 year old at the time and just learning her early stages of how to walk. That last day's wagon ride here to their new home was long and brutal. And as we arrived that afternoon, there in front of our cabin, my oldest daughter Caroline reached up into the wagon to help her youngest sister Sarah down and planted her feet firmly on the ground. Her wobbly legs and weak knees immediately gave way, and she plopped down on her hindquarters. She looked up at us, and we looked down at her and instantly declared Sarah Gifford Elgin's first settler. Thank you so much for being here. God bless you all.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's having a great day today. Great weather. What you see here before you is not a mausoleum. It's not a place for burial. This was known as the holding vault and was built to hold the remains and coffins of people who died during the months when the ground was too deeply frozen to allow for the graves to be dug. There is no longer a need for this vault since heavy equipment has replaced digging a grave with a shovel. So it is now used to store custodial equipment for the cemetery. This vault, as well as the gates behind me, were constructed with blocks of stone, which had previously been used for the holding vault at the Channing Street Cemetery. In 1905, when both Channing and Buffalo Bluff City cemeteries were in use, Abel D. Gifford died on October 5th and was placed in the Channing holding vault to await the spring thaw. It must have been an early winter that year, but that is what the sexton's record book shows. In the spring of 1906, when the family was preparing to bury their loved one, the city of Elgin declared that the Channing Cemetery would no longer accept burials. This upset the family, and the battle between the Giffords and the city went on the whole spring, summer, and fall. Finally, after the spring thaw of 1907, Abel D. Gifford was allowed to rest in peace, but in the Bluff City Cemetery, against the wishes of the family. You have to keep in mind that James T. Gifford donated the land for the original city cemetery on Channing Street with the stipulation that if the land were to ever be used for anything other than the cemetery, it was to be reverted back to the descendants. James T. Gifford, by the way, is one of the founders of City of Elgin in 1835. The interior of the holding vault is seldom seen by the public. It never was meant to have any ceremonial events take place, but was only a place to hold the coffins and remains until the spring thaw. The temperature is quite steady, both winter and summer, due to the fact that it is underground. You can see row on row of iron-faced plates along the walls. Each plate was intended to be a shelf to store the remains and had a place for a lock to prevent a mix-up. In addition, each coffin was tagged with the name of the inhabitant. At this time, I'm going to let you enter the vault. Any other questions? The ceiling, much the same as the subway tiles in the subway. Any questions?
What's the
Good.
back part?
Oh, no questions.
Have any of you ever wanted to make a new beginning? Well, I'm here to tell you about one. My name is David Schofield. I was born in Albany County, New York in 1803. I grew up on my family farm there. I received my education there, and I married my childhood sweetheart there. We had 7 children. You know, sometimes God deals a hand and you just can't understand why. When that happens, we think, as we've been taught, perhaps it's all part of God's grand plan for us, and we just live with it. God dealt such a hand to my young wife. He took her from this earth, away from me and our 7 children. That was, needless to say, a time of great introspection and thoughtfulness for me personally. And after a while, I decided to move west, and I ended up here in Elgin, Illinois. I'd like to ask you that are here to look around and ask if there is any doubt that this is a beautiful, natural setting. And further, I'd like to ask you to try to find and identify what it is that nature has given us here that makes it so. Any ideas? The trees, of course. Well, think of these familiar words. I think that I shall never see a poem as beautiful as a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed against the earth's sweet flowing breast, a tree who looks at God each day and lifts her leafy arms to pray, a tree who in summer may wear a nest of robins in her hair, whose bosom over which snow has lain, who lives intimately with the rain. Poems are written by fools like me, but only God can make a tree. Well, contrary to my father's practice of general farming, I decided to specialize. So the first thing I did when I came to Elgin was to buy 130 acres of land west of town, and I planted and grew trees, of course. 2 years after my arrival, looking for that new beginning, it suddenly appeared before my eyes. I met, fell in love with, and married this beautiful woman. May I present Emily, as I like to call her, God's plan for me.
Well, I don't know about that, but my name is Emily, and it used to be Emily Larkin. My parents, Cyrus and Sarah, were from Fairfield, Vermont. And when I was 11, how old are you, young man?
I'm 11.
You're 11. That's how old I was when my parents settled us here in Elgin. It was a wonderful time. My father, he was a farmer and an insurance agent, and over time he became quite prominent here in Elgin. You see, he was the county assessor for private property, and specifically in the Northwest Township for most of Kane County. In addition, my father was the superintendent for the Methodist Episcopal Sunday School for many years. Now, I married my first love. His name was Calvin Wilcox. I was 20 years old. And only 5 years into our marriage, he died. He was returning from a visit to California. So at 25, I was a widow with no children. It was a very lonely and sad time for me. May I tell them? So, right, I felt a certain attraction towards David, and although he was 23 years my senior, and I attended school with some of his older children, we fell in love. In 1851, we joined hands in marriage, and it was a wonderful time for both of us to be reunited in love. And 3 years into our marriage, I gave birth to our son, Frank. He was such a joy. I was so happy. And then he was taken away from us. At 9.5 years old, he died. I miss our little boy so much. He rests right over there. I just miss him.
In 1867, the Northern Illinois Horticultural Society was formed, and then in 1868, we held our first meeting in Freeport, Illinois. I attended. We were 172 strong. I attended that meeting along with many people who were from the horticultural industry. There were plenty of apple growers, people who told us about the techniques and methods they used for growing and overwintering and selling their apples. There were other fruit growers of all kinds, peaches and plums, pears, apricots, berries. We had strawberries.
Excuse me, David?
Yes?
You know, I quite think your audience may enjoy hearing excerpts from your essay that you presented to the Horticultural Society. Here. Would you?
Thank you. Let me present just a few excerpts from the essay that I wrote and delivered to the organization, the Northern Illinois Horticultural Society. My essay was titled Timber Culture, a National Necessity. Now, I'm not going to read you the entire 1-hour presentation, but just a few excerpts to give you an idea what it was that I felt so strongly about. The unparalleled progress and prosperity of this country may be justly attributed to the convenience, excellence, and abundance of her forests. When our ancestors came to this continent, they found plantations of full-grown trees yielding food for man and beast. And thus we were provided in our helpless infancy as though provided for by a kind father, and we were dependent children. Centuries have passed, the growth of the nation has been vigorous and healthful, but in our national growth, we have nearly exhausted these natural resources. Already the pine is used up. In less than half a century, the supply of this most valuable building timber will be exhausted if we don't do something. Let us look ahead. See the hundreds of millions of people that will follow us, tilling the soil and crowding the thousand cities of this great nation. I ask, whence is to come the building materials to do all this great work? Do new forests of pine and cedar and fir just appear on their own? The answer historically is no. Yet this same pine grows with wonderful rapidity when cultivated in plantations. In testimony, I adduce my forest in Elgin, which 10 years ago was a smooth prairie and then planted with plants, tree seedlings. I am proud that after these years of nurturing and growing these trees, we have over 10,000 trees, and some of them mature enough to be used in the construction of our own home on the corner of Spring and Division Street. I implored the members of this horticultural society to get behind my mission to educate the American people in the need to conserve and replenish our natural resources, specifically our timber. I wonder, after my time is gone, whether this message will still be necessary, and if so, will people be hearing it? Emily and I were partners not only in life, but in business to a small degree. We were both members of the American Forestry Association. However, for Emily, that was only the beginning.
Well, see, with no children to raise, I became committed to serve. I was an active member and worker for the Methodist Episcopal Church. I was the president of the first missionary society for the Methodist Episcopal Church. I was the superintendent for the Young Women's Society. I also was an executive committee member for the Christian Women's Temperance Society. No drinking. I was a lifetime member of the Foreign Mission Society. A wonderful time, finally a sense of fulfillment and giving back and helping others, specifically women. In fact, I was at a meeting in Chicago in 1863 when I contracted a severe cold, which developed into chronic pneumonia. It changed my life. I already had a weak heart. I was unable to keep up with my daily life, and soon I was forced to be bedridden. It was so difficult to breathe. And in fact, in my last year, I couldn't speak. As a Christian woman, I knew that my days were numbered, but that I would soon be reunited with our 9-year-old son, Frank. I looked forward to those days. I asked David to help me. We prepared a will. I asked him to bind my prized possessions. Many of my favorite books were signed by the author. I wanted to leave these to my closest friends and family members as a remembrance of me, something that was so special to me. And Quakerism. First Ladies of the White House. You must give this to Mrs. Miller. Women of the Orient, Poets of Connecticut, see to it that Lottie receives these. Finally, in my will, I gave $500 for the medical education, for the society that I believed in so much and served.
As our friends and family gathered round Emily's bed at our home on the corner of Spring and Division Street, she waved her last farewell, and then she took her last breath. That hand that God had dealt back in New York so long ago made no sense then any more than it did. And the hand that God dealt Emily in 1884, it made no sense at all. He took her at the age of 57, in the prime of her natural life. Thank you so much.
Be happy.
Okay, as you can see, and as you were told down there at the end, this is the Civil War section, veterans and people that were involved in the war. A lot of these were people that actually survived the war and then died much later, but they were veterans nonetheless, and so they're buried here with the veterans of World War I and some of the other wars as well. Music was an integral part and a very important part of just about every war, because it was the one balm that they had that could soothe them better than any kind of medical thing or anything else. It was music therapy at its earliest. Pretty sad song. Thank you. Here's another one that's probably a little bit more familiar, and it's kind of a little bit more of a happy occasion, but it's still in a minor key, and you'll probably recognize this. Okay, so you know that one, when Johnny Comes Marching Home. But they did have happier songs too to get them through too. And this is another one that you'll probably recognize if you went through elementary school and you had a singing class or you had a music class. This might have been on the list. Okay, I'll recognize that one. Goober peas basically were peanuts. And that was the Georgia militia that they talked about, and they're gobbling goober peas because at that particular time there wasn't a whole lot of food out there, so they had to forage and get what they could. So they would dig up peanut plants and roast the peanuts over the fire and eat the peanuts, which were good nutrition for them, you know, when they ran out of other food. Probably one of the most famous tunes ever to come out of the Civil War was a tune written by a guy named Daniel Emmett, who was from Mount Vernon, Ohio, actually. And he obviously had Northern sympathies. He was very much a Union man. He hated what the South did. And most of all, he hated what the South did with his song, which became the most popular song during the war. It was Abraham Lincoln's favorite tune, believe it or not. But the Southerns, they adopted it for their theme song. And the reason they did that is because before the war, Southerners used to come up to the North to work in the factories and stuff because they could find jobs. And they would sit around thinking about good old home days down in Georgia, and we wish we were back there, you know. So Daniel Emmett wrote this song because he heard some of these guys talking about it. And so he wrote this song. And here's the song.
So our focus today is these two gravestones here.
Here are two headstones that have their own stories. They're a mother and daughter, both adults, who died within a short amount of time of each other.
They died of consumption, which was not drinking of alcoholic beverages, but rather it was tuberculosis of the lungs, and at the time it was incredibly fast-acting and uncurable because they had no antibiotics.
They died a short time apart and were buried for their eternal rest in 1860, or so their families thought it was eternal rest.
About 30 years after their burial, the cemetery that they were originally buried at, now Channing Street Cemetery, closed down. Channing Street decided to take everyone that was originally buried there and move them here. Those ones that were able to be moved by family and friends had to be paid for. These two were fortunate enough to have friends and family who would pay for them. About 3,000 other members who were originally buried there at Channing are still there, though. Some graves that were interred as the school developed were then respectfully moved to our gravesite in here and now reside respectfully in their own places. And also, most of them have been moved to the Elgin Fen, by the way. The Elgin Historical Society wants to build a monument in their respect and honor, and that they're trying to raise funds for that as well. So if you are interested in possibly donating for that monument, you can get more information as you leave. And that's it. Thank you. Yeah, very short. Very short.
You did well. Good afternoon. My name is Emmeline Eno Church Borden. I'm delighted to have the privilege of sharing part of my life story with you today. I'm not a native of Elgin. I was born in Colebrook Center, Connecticut, July 26, 1808. My story today begins with the marriage to my first husband, Hiram Church, who is buried here. Hiram was a pelt trader who had settled in the Fox Valley. We met in my hometown of Colebrook Center and were married there. Hiram and I had 2 children, Alfred and Samuel. Our family eventually moved to the Fox Valley, where we lived until Hiram's death. After his death, I returned to Connecticut with my boys. That's where I met Gail Borden. I was 49 years old at the time, and little is known of our courtship. And I actually prefer to keep these memories to myself and my journal. Gail and I were married August 15th, 1860. On the day of our marriage, Gail signed a legal document guaranteeing me $350 a year for the duration of our marriage. This was more than the average annual salary. I must also comment on Gail's relationship with my sons. Gail had been married twice before, and although he had 7 children of his own, 2 died in childhood, however, he treated my sons as though they were his own, showing them genuine affection. He later gave them responsible positions in his company and made Alfred a co-executor of his estate. The affection was mutual. 20 years after his death, my sons gave the City of Elgin a grant for a library, with the provision that city officials name it the Gail Borden Library. I understand to this day the city's library still retains his name. My husband was a man of many talents, the Thomas Edison of his era. He had little education, but he accomplished much. I could spend this entire afternoon telling you of his interesting life, but I understand you have other places to visit, so I'll briefly highlight major events. Gail was born in New York in 1801. His occupations included teacher, surveyor, farmer. In 1829, he married and moved to Texas. There he left his mark. He, along with Stephen Austin, James Bowie, and Sam Houston, framed the Texas Constitution. He also helped found Baylor University. Gail worked on many inventions. He designed a Lazy Susan table as a wedding gift for his second wife. He invented an amphibious machine that would travel on land and water. He also invented a meat biscuit to help remedy travelers' food supply problems. Some called him a genius, others peculiar, but almost all liked him in spite of his eccentricities. Gail's philosophy was he never dropped an idea, except for a better one. As I previously mentioned, Gail and I were married in 1860, and he had spent several years perfecting the process of condensed milk. And in 1856, he succeeded by removing most of the water by boiling the milk and then adding sugar. The Civil War created a need for milk that could be stored. And even after the war was over, the need was just as great as families flocked to cities as the Industrial Revolution progressed. Few had access to fresh milk, or for that matter, a means of keeping it safe for use. The demand for condensed milk convinced Gail he needed more locations. It was I that told him of the rolling hills in the Fox Valley country. He thought this sounded like it was the location he was looking for in the West. Came to Illinois, looked over the area, and indeed, this was the right spot. In 1865, he started a factory, and by the next year, the Elgin Milk Condensing Company was in full operation. The plant was located at Brook and Water Streets. This site has been granted an Illinois State Historical Marker. I understand the marker can be seen at Grove and Symphony Way. Gail was very strict about the cleanliness of the farm supplying milk. His condensed milk had a reputation of being the highest purity, uniformity, and quite suitable for children. By 1889, the Eagle brand condensed milk was being shipped worldwide. The Elgin Milk Condensing Company was a key factor in determining Elgin's reputation as a dairy center. Gail never had the pleasure of living in Elgin, although we had purchased an elegant home at 378 Division Street. He died before we were able to move in. He died in Borden, Texas, January 11th, 1874, and was buried in his birthplace of White Plains, New York. I did say I could go on and on about my husband, didn't I? Well, he was an amazing man who certainly made an impact on Elgin. As for myself, I lived till the ripe age of 81. I lived in our beautiful home on Division Street. I was taken ill as a result of a severe cold and died after a week's illness, January 24th, 1890. My obituary was a kind one, mentioning my generosity to the poor and those in need. If there's a lesson which Mr. Borden would like to pass on, it could be summed up by his two-line epitaph. I tried and failed. I tried again and succeeded. A lesson worth contemplating, don't you think? Thank you for taking time to visit me today. Thank you.
Good morning. Before I get started, I have a couple quick questions. Does anyone here have paper roofing on their house? No? Does anyone here drink beer in Elgin? Ah, well, thank you for your business. My name is Bernhard Hegelow. I was born January 26th, 1830 in the Kingdom of Württemberg, what you would know of as Germany, where I studied the roofing trade for 19 years before moving to America. There, I continued to study advancements in the field, working in mostly New York and Canada, where I met my first wife, Barbara Schlegel. We got married in a beautiful ceremony up in Niagara Falls, before deciding to move and learn about the Midwest, and we ended up in Bloomington, Illinois. After a couple years there learning the lay of the land, we ended up in Elgin in 1864 when I was 34 years old. There, utilizing what I had learned over the years, I opened the first paper roofing company in the state, and business was booming. Paper roofing was a necessary item for people. And using what I had learned, I was able to put advancements in that made my mill in South Elgin massive. It ran so well, I was well known. But in 1874, tragedy struck. For you see, paper roofing is made of paper and tar, so it's somewhat flammable. Well, when a fire ran through, everything I had built was wiped out in just a few hours. Everything was gone. Imagine, 46 years old, and I had been a titan. And then, nothing. Many would have given up. Many expected me to give up. But no. I switched businesses and regrew. I rose again. For you see, over the years, I had wisely invested the majority of my income into real estate and farming, mostly real estate in downtown Elgin. I had a whole block, then known as the Hegelow Block. You might know it more as North Grove. My buildings actually still stand there today, and I'd encourage you to visit them. North Grove and East Highland. Go on in. Tell them Bernhard sent you. Well, other than my property interests and the farming interests, I needed more to do. So, using the income I had there and some other savings, I started a new trade. The wholesaling and bottling of beer. I was actually one of the first producers of Pabst Blue Ribbon. Now, I also started a small tavern there. That way you could enjoy the drink right off the press. There I am in it. That's me in the center, enjoying a cold glass of my own product. This was a very profitable line of work, but my heart wasn't in it. My true passion was in my real estate and farming. So I decided to step back and devote more time to my family. Over the course of the 30 years of marriage with my wife, Barbara, we had 4 beautiful daughters. The twins got married in a double ceremony. One of them to the future mayor of Elgin, Mayor Furman. That's him right there before he became mayor. Well, tragically, January 26th, 1889, Barbara passed away suddenly of heart disease. Just over a year later, my daughter Amelia died as well of consumption. But 1890 wasn't all tragedy and loss. I met my second wife, Mary Frey. She and I got married in Kenosha, Wisconsin. She was a widow, and she brought with her a daughter from her first marriage, who I accepted as my own. In fact, after my death, my other daughters all testified that she was to them a true sister. Throughout all of these personal and professional ups and downs, I remained very active in the community. I was a member of the Bethel Commandery, a Knight Templar, a 32nd degree Mason. I also was a member of the Board of Education of Clintonville. You know it, it's now called South Elgin. In 1894, I decided I'm going to step back again and just meddle a bit in my own real estate and farming interests and step back from some other activities. And in 1895, I bought my home at 1045 Spring Street, which was actually on the historic Elgin House tour. From there, I spent the rest of my days in that home, dying January 13th, 1907. Very peacefully in my sleep, but tragedy nonetheless. And that's the end of my story. So if you have any questions of the roofing business, the beer bottling business, or really anything else to do with Elgin, please feel free to ask me of it. Otherwise, enjoy your visit to the rest of us here today at Bluff City. Thanks for stopping by.
In the mid-1700s, there was a ship's captain, and he sailed from England to Africa to the eastern shores of America. And the cargo he carried was men and women brought to America to be sold into bondage as slaves. On one of his journeys, his ship was caught in a terrible storm at sea. The captain, who had no faith in God, looked to the heavens and pleaded that his ship and his crew and cargo reach port safely. The storm subsided, and the ship did in fact sail into port safely. The captain saw this as a sign of God's grace, and he promised to stop what he was doing and turn his life around. He returned to England, walked away from his ship, and began the study of theology. In 1764, he became an ordained minister. He spent the rest of his life teaching the gospel. It's said he could be seen walking the streets of London in his captain's uniform with a Bible under his arm. So it is Reverend John Newton who is given credit for writing the words to this hymn. There were at least 8 different melodies attached to his words. Today, 200 years after Reverend Newton committed his words to paper, it is the most recognized hymn in the English-speaking world.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind,